Picture this. It's 50,000 years ago. The sun just went down. There's no Netflix, no phone, no low-grade dread about the emails you didn't answer. There's just you, a fire, and a thick column of smoke curling straight into your face. And somewhere at some point, one of your ancestors coughed, wiped their eyes, looked at that smoke and thought, wait, what if I did that on purpose? This is the story of how humans started smoking. Not cigarettes, not cigars, not the guy outside the office you somehow talk to for 20 minutes every day. We're talking about the very first time a human being deliberately breathed in something that was on fire, and why that might be one of the oldest habits our entire species has, because here's the part nobody tells you: smoking doesn't begin with tobacco. It doesn't begin with trade routes or ceremonies or farming. The urge to inhale smoke might be wired into us on a level so deep it's older than civilization itself, and the evidence for that is genuinely a little unhinged. Let's start with fire, because before you can smoke anything, you need fire, and fire has been in the human story for an absurdly long time. The oldest solid evidence of our ancestors controlling fire comes from a place called Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa. It's around 1 million years old. Archaeologists found burnt plant ash and charred bits of bone deep inside a cave where a wildfire couldn't reach. Somebody carried that fire in, somebody kept it going. Now, 1 million years ago, we weren't even human yet, not Homo sapiens. That was Homo erectus, our older cousin, smaller brain, heavier brow, and absolutely no interest in your opinion about it. But they sat around fires, just like we do. They cooked, they stayed warm, they huddled together in the dark, and every single one of them breathed smoke constantly for hundreds of thousands of years. It was unavoidable. It was the original air quality problem, and nobody had an app to check the reading. Here's where it gets interesting. Not all of that smoke was plain wood smoke. When you burn a plant, you don't just get carbon dioxide and steam. You get a whole cocktail of chemicals, and it depends entirely on what you're burning. Some plants, when they burn, release compounds that do things to the human nervous system. Noticeable things, which means, to put it plainly, some of our ancestors were absolutely accidentally getting high around the campfire, and they had no idea why they suddenly felt fantastic. This isn't a fringe idea. Researchers have argued for decades that early humans, living surrounded by wild plants, would have regularly breathed the smoke of psychoactive ones: cannabis, wild tobacco relatives, all sorts of plants that grow naturally across Africa, Europe, and Asia. And here's the wild bit: the human brain has receptors that respond to compounds in cannabis. Those receptors didn't evolve because of cannabis. They're part of a system in your body that quietly manages your mood, your memory, your appetite. But it means that the first time a human breathed in burning cannabis smoke, their brain wasn't confused. Their brain went, "Oh, there you are, I've been waiting." And that moment, that first accidental lungful of psychoactive smoke, next to some prehistoric fire that might be the true beginning of smoking, not a decision, not a plan, just a very pleasant accident, repeated enough times that eventually someone thought, let's do that again, on purpose. Sit with that for a second. The entire trillion-dollar tobacco industry, centuries of ritual, shamans, medicine, every awkward smoke break in history, all of it may trace back to one tired hunter sitting downwind of the wrong bush and having an unexpectedly great evening. History is sometimes beautiful in the dumbest possible way. Now we have to be careful here, because ancient humans breathed smoke from plants and ancient humans grew plants specifically to smoke them are two very different claims. So let's talk about what the archaeology actually proves. The oldest hard evidence of people deliberately using cannabis comes from a burial site high in the Pama Mountains of Central Asia. It's around 2,500 years old. Roughly 500 BC diggers found wooden braziers holding stones that had been heated until they glowed, along with the chemical fingerprint of cannabis. And not the boring kind grown for rope. This cannabis had unusually high levels of the This was the good stuff, and it was placed on purpose in a grave. But here's the question that should be nagging at you. Does the absence of older evidence mean it didn't happen earlier? Or does it just mean we haven't found it? Because plants don't last. Seeds, leaves, fibers, they rot, they vanish. We find stone tools from 3 million years ago because stone basically lasts forever. But a wooden pipe packed with dried herbs? Gone in a couple of centuries. A leather pouch of cannabis dissolves back into the dirt long before any archaeologist shows up with a trowel. So in this case, absence of evidence is very much not evidence of absence. Then there's the Herodotus problem. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, writing in the 5th century BC, described a people called the Scythians, nomads of the Eurasian steppe, and he described in vivid detail what he called their vapor baths. They'd build a small sealed tent, heat stones until they glowed, throw hemp seeds onto the hot stones, then sit inside, breathing the smoke and, in his words, howling with pleasure. For centuries, historians assumed old Herodotus was exaggerating, making it up. Then archaeologists started digging into Scythian burial mounds, and they found, you can probably guess, bronze braziers, heated stones, and hemp residue, exactly what he described. The man wasn't embellishing. If anything, he was underselling it. Okay. Let's talk about tobacco, the one most people actually picture when they think of smoking. Tobacco is a plant native to the Americas, and that matters enormously because it means tobacco was completely unknown to the Old World, Europe, Africa, Asia, until contact with the Americas in the late 1400s. When European explorers turned up in the Caribbean in 1492, they immediately noticed the locals doing something strange. Columbus wrote about it himself, people walking around with small glowing rolls of leaves, breathing in the smoke and letting it drift out of their mouths and noses. His crew was baffled. His crew also, within weeks, tried it themselves, because of course they did. But tobacco in the Americas is far, far older than Columbus. Chemical traces of it, found inside ancient pipes, go back at least 3,500 years in what's now the southeastern United States, and some researchers think the real story runs much deeper than that. Here's the crucial thing about tobacco in the ancient Americas, though. It wasn't casual, it was sacred. Tobacco was used in healing, in talking to the spirit world, in sealing agreements between tribes. Blowing smoke over someone was a blessing, an act of connection, of respect. A shaman with a pipe wasn't taking a cigarette break. He was opening a door between the living and the divine. The smoke itself was seen as a living messenger, something that carried prayers upward and brought visions back down. And that framing matters. It's why tobacco use was so disciplined, so careful, so ritualized in so many cultures for thousands of years. When something is sacred, you treat it with reverence. You don't chain smoke it while half watching TV. The idea of tobacco as a casual, everyday, lunch break habit, that's an almost entirely European invention, and a surprisingly recent one. Now let's go back further, because there's a piece of this most people have never heard, and it might be the oldest evidence of deliberate smoking anywhere on Earth. In the deserts of Utah, archaeologists found an ancient fireplace, about 12,000 years old, and inside it the seeds of wild tobacco. These weren't seeds that blew in by accident, they were concentrated, placed, and this site is older than any pipe or pot in the region by thousands of years. Hunter-gatherers, at the very end of the last ice age, were already doing something intentional with tobacco, which raises a genuinely fascinating question. If people in Utah were putting tobacco in fires 12,000 years ago, what was everyone else doing? Because 12,000 years ago, humans were everywhere. Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia. And the urge to alter your own mind, to go looking for a different state of consciousness, that is not an American thing. That is a human thing, which brings us to an idea that sounds wild but is taken seriously by respected anthropologists. It's called the intoxication hypothesis. The argument goes like this. In basically every human culture ever recorded, people have found ways to alter their consciousness. They've brewed alcohol, eaten strange mushrooms, inhaled smoke, chewed leaves, swallowed seeds. This behavior is so universal, so stubborn, and so independent across cultures that some researchers think it can't just be an accident. A scientist named Ronald Siegel argued in the 1980s that the pursuit of intoxication is a fourth drive sitting right alongside hunger, thirst, and sex, something built into animal life, not just human life. And he had examples. Elephants have long been said to seek out fermented fruit. Reindeer in Siberia have been seen eating a certain psychoactive mushroom and then drinking the urine of other reindeer that ate the same mushroom, because the active compounds pass straight through. Reindeer recycling in Siberia, honestly respect. Scientists still argue about how tipsy an elephant can really get, but the bigger point stands. If the drive to change your own mind is this deep and this old, then it's completely reasonable to think early humans, long before they farmed anything, long before pipes or pottery, were deliberately breathing smoke from psychoactive plants, because experience had taught them it did something. Maybe they burned those plants on purpose during rituals. Maybe they camped near certain plants for exactly this reason. Maybe they learned which smoke made you feel wonderful and which smoke made you feel like you were dying, which, with some plants, is a lesson you only get to learn once. This was trial and error, prehistoric. Addition, very high stakes, occasionally fatal. But the ones who survived remembered, they told others, they passed it down, generation after generation of knowledge that never got written but got lived, because that's how nearly all human knowledge worked for nearly all of human history. Not libraries, not schools, just lived experience passed mouth to ear, around a fire, in the dark. Here's something that almost never comes up. Smoking, for a very long time, was medicine. Long before it was recreational, long before it was spiritual, it may have been medical. One of the oldest medical documents in the world from ancient Egypt, around 1500 BC, describes treating problems of the throat and lungs by inhaling the smoke of heated herbs, which, from a modern point of view, sounds completely insane. You treated lung problems by breathing smoke? Yes, they did. And while it sounds mad, some of the specific herbs they used genuinely do have real effects when inhaled. The ancient Greeks did the same. Hippocrates, the guy whose oath doctors still swear, wrote about inhaling herbal vapors to treat diseases of the lungs. And the logic wasn't crazy for the time. Smoke goes straight to the lungs. So if a plant has healing properties, delivering it as smoke makes a certain kind of sense. The lungs. As a delivery system, inhaled medicine. We still do exactly this with asthma inhalers, with anesthetic gases, with nebulizers. The delivery method survived. The setting things on fire part, thankfully, mostly didn't. Ancient Indian medicine, going back over 3,000 years, describes a practice literally called smoke drinking, inhaling medicinal herbs through a pipe. Specific plants, specific conditions, specific recipes. This wasn't improvised. It was a whole system, refined over centuries. Across ancient China, Mesopotamia, Greece, India, in nearly every early civilization on record, people were deliberately inhaling smoke as a recognized form of medicine. Not because they were addicted, not because it was cool, because at least sometimes it worked, and in a world with no antibiotics and no surgery, works sometimes. Was a genuinely meaningful bar too clear? There's another angle here that doesn't get enough credit: social bonding. Humans are deeply social animals. We evolved in groups, and a group's ability to stick together, trust each other, and act as one was, for most of our history, a matter of life and death. The loner died, the group survived. So anything that strengthened social bonds had real survival value, and shared rituals, including sharing an altered state together, are one of the most powerful bonding tools there is. When a group goes through an intense shared experience together, it creates trust and connection that's very hard to build any other way. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Shared rituals sync up people's brain activity and deepen group identity in ways you can actually measure. So when a group of ancient humans sat together in a closed space, breathing smoke, and slipped into an altered state as one that wasn't just a party, that was social technology. That was how you built the kind of deep trust that let you walk into danger together and come back alive. The smoke circle wasn't a party, it was infrastructure. And now we get to the uncomfortable part of the story, because the jump from sacred smoke to casual habit was, historically, an absolute catastrophe. When tobacco reached Europe in the 1500s, it spread with a speed that should feel familiar. Within decades, it went from exotic curiosity to continental obsession. By the 1600s, it was traded worldwide. By the 1700s, powdered tobacco sniffed up the nose was high fashion. By the 1800s, cigars were everywhere. And by the early 1900s, the machine-made cigarette arrived, making tobacco cheaper, easier, and more addictive than anything before it. What had taken indigenous Americans thousands of years to build into a careful, sacred cultural practice was turned, in the hands of industrialists, into a mass-market product in about 4 centuries. And then the tobacco industry spent decades hiding the fact that cigarettes cause cancer, evidence their own scientists had found. They marketed to children. They paid doctors to endorse the product. They tweaked the chemistry specifically to make the addiction hit harder. A shaman and a tobacco executive both worked with the same plant. They had almost nothing else in common. The gap between someone placing cannabis on hot stones in a sacred burial and an executive signing off on marketing cigarettes to teenagers is one of the widest moral canyons in human history. Both involve smoke, almost nothing else is the same. So when did ancient humans start smoking? The honest answer is we don't know exactly, and we probably never will. The physical evidence gets us back 12,000 years with real confidence and maybe much further with reasonable guessing. But the drive underneath it, the urge to alter your mind, to share ritual, to breathe medicine is almost certainly far older than any object we've dug up. It may be as old as fire itself. It may be as old as the mental leap that made us human in the first place, the ability to look at a burning plant and think last time that happened, I felt different. Let me do that again. That's not addiction, that's intelligence. What we do know is this: the behavior is ancient. It's older than farming, older than pottery, older than every civilization you learned about in school. And by the time anyone anywhere started writing things down, humans were already finding ways to put smoke into their bodies. The plants changed, the rituals changed, the reasons changed, but the behavior was already old. And there's something almost beautiful about that. For everything that separates us from our ancestors, the technology, the medicine, the internet, the truly baffling amount of stuff we scroll through every day, there are these thin, unbroken threads running back through 100,000 years of being human: fire, smoke, breath. The oldest humans sat around fires and smelled the same smoky air you'd smell at a bonfire tonight. Some of them at some point started paying attention to what that smoke was doing to them, and then they started choosing it, and then they passed that choice down to their children and their children's children, and eventually to the Scythians howling in their tents, and the Egyptian healers with their herbs, and the shamans reading visions in the rising smoke. So next time you flip a light switch, or sit by a summer fire, or catch a drift of wood smoke on a cold night, you're part of something far older than you think. You're doing what humans have always done. You're breathing.